60 years ago today, civil rights leader Medgar Evers was gunned down in front of his Mississippi home.
Jackson, Mississippi. Just after midnight, June 12, 1963. A man pulls into his driveway carrying a stack of T-shirts that read, "Jim Crow must go." He has just come from a meeting, exhausted, hopeful, and afraid because for months he has known someone wants him dead. He never makes it through his own front door. Medgar Wiley Evers was born on July 2, 1925, in Decatur, Mississippi, a small town in the state's red clay heart. As a boy, Evers walked 12 miles round trip to attend a school for black children, passing the whites-only school built with better funding just down the road. It was an early daily lesson in the arithmetic of Jim Crow. Separate and never equal. At 17, Evers left school to enlist in the U.S. Army. He served in World War II, landing in Normandy in the campaign that followed D-Day, and rose to the rank of sergeant. Like tens of thousands of black servicemen, he returned home from fighting fascism abroad only to find the same segregation waiting for him at the train station. That contradiction became the engine of his life's work. In 1946, Evers and a group of black veterans attempted to register to vote in Decatur. They were turned away by an armed white mob. It was not the last time Evers would be threatened for trying to exercise a constitutional right, but it was the moment that set his course. He enrolled at Alcorn Agricultural and Mechanical College, Mississippi's land-grant school for black students, where he studied business administration, ran track, played football, and met a fellow student named Merle Beasley. They married in 1951. Merle Evers would go on to become one of the most important figures in the story that followed, not only as his wife, but as a civil rights leader in her own right. After college, Medgar and Merle moved to Mound Bayou, an all-black town founded by former slaves, where Evers sold insurance policies to black families across the Mississippi Delta. The job put him on back roads and front porches throughout the state. And what he saw there, poverty, intimidation, and the routine violence used to enforce segregation, pushed him further into activism. In 1954, Evers applied to the University of Mississippi Law School. His application was rejected because he was black. The NAACP, which had just won its landmark victory in Brown versus Board of Education that same year, took notice of the rejected application and of the young insurance salesman who had filed it. Later that year, the NAACP hired Evers as its first field secretary in the state of Mississippi. He was 29 years old, and he had just accepted one of the most dangerous jobs in America. Mississippi in the mid-1950s was, by nearly every account, the most violently resistant state in the country when it came to civil rights. It had the largest black population of any state and one of the lowest rates of black voter registration. Lynchings, while declining in frequency nationally, still occurred there with near impunity. As an AACP field secretary, Evers' job was to investigate racial violence, organize voter registration drives, coordinate boycotts of businesses that discriminated against black customers, and help recruit and support black students seeking to integrate all-white schools and colleges. It was Evers who traveled to Money, Mississippi in 1955 to investigate the murder of 14-year-old Emmett Till, a black teenager from Chicago who was brutally lynched after being accused of whistling at a white woman. Evers, sometimes disguised as a sharecropper to avoid detection, gathered evidence and helped locate witnesses willing to testify, an act of extraordinary risk in a region where testifying against white men for killing a black child could get a witness killed too. Over the following years, Evers organized boycotts of white-owned businesses in Jackson that refused to hire black employees or treated black customers with disrespect. He pushed for the desegregation of public facilities. He worked to register black voters county by county, often facing poll taxes, rigged literacy tests, and outright violence designed to keep black Mississippians away from the ballot box. By 1963, Evers had become the most visible civil rights leader in Mississippi. He gave a televised address on Jackson's NBC affiliate that May, responding to the mayor's defense of segregation, and calmly laid out the case for equal rights to a statewide audience, an almost unthinkable act of exposure in that place and time. The threats against him were constant. His office and home had already been targets. A firebomb was thrown at his family's carport weeks before his death, and a car had once tried to run him down. On the night of June 11, 1963, President John F. Kennedy delivered a televised address to the nation on civil rights, calling it a moral issue as old as Scripture and as clear as the Constitution. Evers watched the broadcast, then attended a late-night strategy meeting with fellow NAACP organizers. Just after midnight, he drove home to his house on Gaines Street in Jackson. a modest home in a neighborhood of black professionals, deliberately designed by Evers and Murley without a front door directly facing the street, in the hope of protecting the family from a drive-by attack. It didn't save him. As Evers stepped out of his car carrying a bundle of Jim Crow Must Go t-shirts, a shot rang out from a wooded lot across the street. A single .30-06 rifle bullet struck him in the back, tore through his body, and shattered a window and a wall inside his own home before coming to rest on a kitchen counter. Murley Evers, inside with the couple's 3 young children, heard the shot and ran outside. Their children, who had been told to fall to the floor at the sound of gunfire in case of exactly this scenario, followed their father's training. Neighbors rushed to help carry Evers to a car. He was raced to a hospital that, in a small irony of the era, initially refused to admit him because of his race before staff relented. Medgar Evers died less than an hour later. He was 37 years old. His murder came less than 3 weeks after Kennedy's civil rights address and sent shockwaves through the country. Evers was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery in recognition of his World War II service, the first black serviceman honored there for a civil rights-related death of that scale, and a burial attended by thousands. Investigators recovered the rifle from a honeysuckle thicket near the crime scene. A fingerprint was found on the telescopic site. It belonged to a man named Byron Della Beckwith, a fertilizer salesman from Greenwood, Mississippi, and an outspoken member of the White Citizens Council, an organization dedicated to preserving segregation through political and economic pressure and, for some of its members, violence. Beckwith was arrested within days. He denied the murder, claiming his rifle had been stolen prior to the shooting. The case went to trial in early 1964, an all-white, all-male jury, as was standard in Mississippi at the time, since black citizens were systematically excluded from jury pools through the very voter suppression Evers had spent his career fighting. All-white juries proved unwilling to convict a white man of murdering a black civil rights leader, despite the evidence against him. Beckwith walked free. He went on to run for lieutenant governor of Mississippi in 1967, campaigning openly as a segregationist and receiving a notable share of the vote. He remained involved in white supremacist organizing for decades afterward, including later ties to a paramilitary group. For nearly 3 decades, the case sat unresolved. Murley Evers, who had moved to California and became a prominent civil rights activist, and later the first woman to chair the NAACP's national board, never stopped pushing for the case to be reopened. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, new evidence emerged. A Mississippi journalist and investigators uncovered records showing that the state's Segregationist Sovereignty Commission, a taxpayer-funded state agency created to preserve segregation, had secretly assisted Beckwith's defense during the 1964 trials, including vetting and helping to select sympathetic jurors. That revelation undercut the fairness of the original proceedings and opened a legal path to retry Beckwith without violating protections against double jeopardy, since the earlier trials had ended in hung juries rather than acquittals. Hinds County District Attorney Ed Peters reopened the case. In 1994, more than 30 years after the murder, Byron Della Beckwith stood trial a 3rd time. By then, he was 73 years old. This time, the jury was racially mixed, 8 black jurors and 4 white jurors, reflecting a Mississippi that, while still grappling with its past, had been reshaped by the very civil rights movement Evers had died advancing, including the Voting Rights Act of 1965. On February 5, 1994, the jury convicted Byron Della Beckwith of the murder of Medgar Evers. He was sentenced to life in prison. Beckwith appealed unsuccessfully and died in prison in 2001, having spent his final years continuing to insist on his innocence.